Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of ESG Watch, a webcast series focusing on pressing issues in corporate governance, sustainability, and citizenship. I'm Paul Washington, Executive Director of the ESG Center here at the Conference Board. The Conference Board is the world's leading nonprofit independent think tank focusing on serving business and society, and we've been doing that for over 100 years. At the ESG Center, our mission is to help companies navigate their evolving role in society. Today, as we're observing Climate Week, our webcast focuses on a key question, which is how the sustainability and finance functions that companies can work together more effectively. And the sustainability issues are business issues. That means they're no longer the province of fringe investors or siloed departments, but they're really on the agenda for mainstream investors, for boards, for CEOs, and for CFOs, and their entire finance team. But bringing sustainability and finance together can sometimes be like bringing together two very different families at a wedding. They come with different cultures and different backgrounds and different perspectives, and they can eye each other with a little bit of suspicion. So the challenge is really how to find that common interest in the well-being of the new couple and bring those differing perspectives to bear and backgrounds to bear in a way that's beneficial for all. And that involves learning a new language sometimes, learning areas of connection, and forging a common culture. And we'll talk about all of that. And to talk about that, I am really delighted to be joined by four extraordinary professionals and experts in this field. So starting off with Scott Herron, who is Senior Vice President and Chief Financial Officer at Autodesk. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you.
Michael Kabori, who is Chief Sustainability Officer at Starbucks. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Paul.
We have Katrina Reimel, who's Vice President of Investor Relations and Sustainability, an interesting combo, at Equinix. Welcome. And Brad Sparks, who is currently the Executive Director at the Prince's Accounting for Sustainability Project, the A4S CFO Leadership Network. Welcome, Brad. Good to see you again. Before we begin, I've got a few housekeeping notes to cover. Some of this was put up there in the welcoming video, but I got to talk about it too for just a couple minutes. First, we're offering CPE credit for participating in today's live program. To get this credit, you need to enter your full name, email address, and specify CPE in the request. CPE credit states at the bottom of your screen. Please note that 3 pop-up messages will occur during the program to confirm your participation, and please click OK each time you see one, and you need to stay online for the entire webcast if you'd like CPE credit. Second, I want to underscore that we really welcome audience participation in today's session. You can ask questions at any time by entering them in the chat box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll work them into the conversation as best as possible. And if we can't get to them, we'll follow up afterwards. A few other notes. You can download additional background materials in the download section at the bottom of your screen. You can enlarge your video if you want to see us even full screen by clicking on the 4 arrows in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. You can share this program, and please do so with your colleagues after the fact, as it'll be available on demand in a couple days. And then finally, please complete the evaluation form at the end of this webcast. It really helps us improve them as we go along. So now with that out of the way, let's get started. I mentioned your titles in the introduction, and they're all rather different. And I'd like to start off by just asking you a bit about how you came to the area of sustainability, what your sort of personal journey was in this area. Michael, would you lead us off? You've had an interesting career.
Sure, thanks, Paul. I am the Chief Sustainability Officer at Starbucks. I've been in this role for 9 months since January, and before that was 22 years at Levi Strauss & Company in San Francisco leading sustainability. Prior to Levi's, I actually was in the nonprofit sector. I worked for an organization called the Asia Foundation on human rights and economic development issues in Asia.
Great. Thanks. So from nonprofit world, Levi's, Starbucks, and Scott, you're CFO, but with a strong interest in sustainability. How did that come into your world, or how did you come into that world?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. It's it's something that's interested me for a long time. I mean, there's only one planet, at least as far as we can tell right now, that we can inhabit, and so I think it's up to us to take care of it. But in my current role as CFO, one of the core responsibilities is just financial stewardship of the company, right? Looking after all the aspects of that, and I think that extends, when you start talking about sustainability, to stewardship of the environment, stewardship of the planet. I think it's important not only to us as business leaders, it's important to me as a parent as well, because in some way we're handing off the planet to the next generation. I think it's important that we're good stewards while it's on our watch. And so I was eager to join His Royal Highness's Accounting for Sustainability, the A4S group, when they first set it up here in the U.S., and to get a chance to work with Brad and a lot of my colleagues, a lot of fairly large company CFOs, including your former CFO at Levi's, Michael. And it's an organization that I think shows a lot of passion and a lot of energy for what we need to do to drive sustainability and to drive it from a seat of financial leadership, not just as the sustainability organization inside our company.
Great, that's interesting. Yeah, so part of this is it's a professional journey and it's a personal journey for you, and you're doing it with other CFOs. Katrina, how you've got this interesting dual role. How did that come about for you?
Well, like many of us, it's been a journey for me. My background is investor relations, so I've been at Equinix for 10 years, and about 2 years ago, I was asked to be the executive sponsor of the sustainability program to try to give it more visibility. And as I got more involved, I was so excited about the program. I realized there's so much more to it than just a reporting function, and I started to actually change it from just we used to spend 10 months to put together a report, 1 month catching our breath, and then start reporting again. So we've done a lot of work to condense down the reporting cycle down to 4 months, and my passion is coming from the engagement on the strategy side and the idea of how do we get sustainability embedded across the organization. So I moved from executive sponsor to, we actually merged the investor relations and the sustainability program team. We went from half a head who was just mostly focused on the report to 3 dedicated heads. And I know that sounds like a really small team, but it makes a world of difference because it's those people who are the ones engaging cross-functionally. So if you don't have the cash on your team, you can't have that broader impact. So I'm on year 2, and there's still so much more to be done. But it's been interesting kind of representing sustainability out of the finance organization.
Yes, that is. And may serve as a model for others. And Brad, how did you get here?
Yeah, and so similar to Michael, I've been in this space for quite some time and was lucky to really start thinking about this early in my career. I was working at the time for a company that some of you may remember, Gateway Computers, the cow company that was manufacturing large desktops and shipping them around the world from Sioux City, Iowa. And working at Gateway at the time, this was 20 years ago, we needed to do a lot of cost cutting. And when we thought about cost cutting, we started to look at the distribution channels and transportation channels that we were using, and there was ample opportunity to both reduce some of the environmental impacts that we were having then, as well as saving money, which was definitely needed for Gateway at the time. And I was able to do that as part of my role within the team's internal audit group, and that prompted really where I've pivoted since then and working in sustainability and accounting with KPMG for the last 15 years, and then taking on this role last year with A4S and getting to work with tremendous CFOs like Scott and many others across the U.S. on thinking about this connection between sustainability and finance.
Great, thanks. So that's really interesting. So all rather somewhat different journeys, right, to get to this place where we are as you as individuals. I'm interested about your companies too. I mean, in a report that we put out at the conference board a while back called Integrating Sustainability into Your Core Business, which I think is still a really good report, and hopefully people will read it. We can put a link up to it later. It talks about the phases. They're not like the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross phases of grief, right? But they are some phases of building sustainability. Hopefully it's the opposite effect, building sustainability into your business. It can start off by, this is our legal requirement. We got to do this for compliance. It can move on to things that, sort of it's expected of you, right, by your investors, your customers, or others. So you do what you need to sort of comply with those expectations. Then it can move on to some things that are more than just sort of risk mitigation, that actually it's smart to do. It can lead to product innovation. It can be a launching pad for new business opportunities. And then in the final stage, it can be something that's actually deeply embedded into your business, into all of your processes, and even be part of why you show up to work every day, why your employees in general show up to work every day. And companies are at different stages of this journey, and it's different for each one, and there's no value judgment as to where you are. It depends on a cost-benefit analysis for every company to figure out where they are. But I'm just curious, thinking about this as a sort of rough guide to the sustainability journey for companies. Scott, where would you place Autodesk on this?
It's a great question, and I love the spectrum of from legal requirement up through, hey, we have a leadership role. We're well beyond obligation, of course, and I'd say focused on leadership in this space. It's, if you know what Autodesk does, we create design software, and that software, buildings get designed in it, tall structures. We have products that cars, automobiles are designed in, running shoes are designed in, appliances, right? It's all design software. And to a great extent, I think sustainability is a design issue. In other words, once a building has been built and constructed, there's only so much you can do to manage the carbon footprint that it's producing, right? And so what you really have to do is design with sustainability in mind. Or once a car has been produced, once a dishwasher has been produced, right? This really is much more of a design problem. And so we've done things like partnered with one of our customers to create a calculator that will inspect the design of a building, for example, and give you a sense in some level of granularity what the embedded carbon will be as that building is built, so that at that design phase you can start to make choices, right, to reduce the embedded carbon, and then of course to run it more sustainably once it's been constructed. So we're at the point of not just looking at this as something of course we run our own company. We'll get to net zero this year as a business, so it's something that we've embedded internally. But it also is an opportunity for us to have a much bigger impact by helping our customers design for sustainability.
That's really interesting, right? And that's a great point, that it's not just what you're doing internally. Your real leverage may be on what you help your customers do. It's true for consumer products companies.
Absolutely. It's a huge ripple effect. But the company's only, a little more than 10,000 people. But we have, literally hundreds of thousands of customers, and each of them are designing something. To the extent that they can make those designs more sustainable, either through the make phase or in operations, I think that's an opportunity to have a much broader impact as a company.
That's interesting. And Michael, from your perspective, whether at Levi's or now at Starbucks, where would you place your company on this spectrum? I think you're pretty far out, but just curious.
I think we are, and I like this diagram. It actually kind of parallels. So I've been doing this work for 25 years, and it sort of parallels in terms of my career and who I was reporting to. So at Levi's, when I started, I was really doing the labor standards compliance in the supply chain, and I was actually reporting into the legal department at that time because it was primarily seen as a legal compliance function. That evolved, and then I was reporting to the chief supply chain officer, and there, in addition to that legal risk, we were looking at, obviously, cost, right, and protecting the reputation. At Starbucks, I report into our head of product marketing and innovation, our chief marketing officer. So it's really in the core of the business, where we're not only directly building sustainability into product, but also into how we engage with our customers and into all of our innovation processes. So when you talk about evolving it into part of the growth driver of the company, I like to think that's where we are at Starbucks, because it really is getting very embedded in plant-based menu items, for example, that we are now creating and providing to the customer. It's evolved into greener store design that present to our customers that kind of sustainable experience that we know that Gen Z consumers are very interested in. So it's really flowed along that diagram that you have. I would say the other thing to note is my team is actually quite small. For Starbucks, which has got 300,000 employees globally, I have 10 people on my global sustainability team. And the reason we can do that is because we are doing the strategy and the integration and really a lot of the external relationships with different think tanks, NGOs, and so forth. But the actual driving of sustainability into the business functions is done by the teams that are actually embedded in supply chain. So there's a team in supply chain that's working on the sustainability in the supply chain. There's a team in store development. There's a team in product development and innovation. And obviously in all of our markets, we have folks dedicated to sustainability. So it's really embedded in the business. And I'm very grateful because that's, per your diagram and per the way I always think about it, that's really where we want to be.
That's interesting. So as you move along this, you sort of need to also move down into the pyramid and need to get more and more embedded into the business, and that makes it possible to do it. Now, Katrina may ask to triple her staff, having now heard that you have 10 and she's got 3.
I've gone from half to 3, so I'm doing pretty good.
Yeah,
I'll support you, Katrina.
Talking going on right during the webcast. And Katrina, just to you, and how would you say your firm is on this spectrum?
Yeah, so as background, Equinix, we're one of the largest data center companies in the world. So as you can imagine, our footprint, when we did our 2015 materiality assessment, it is all about the energy consumption. So to give you a sense, our company is using, our customers are using about 500,000 U.S. homes worth of energy. So we're one of the largest energy buyers out there today. So the initial focus of the program was around sourcing of energy and promoting renewables. And that's the path, if I look at that curve, that's the path we've moved up towards leadership over the last 5 years. And I'm really proud of the work we've done. But the thing about sustainability is the minute you get one leadership category, there's such a wide spectrum, right? So we're starting back at the ground. I feel like sometimes I have rocks I'm trying to push up the hill, right? So it's, well, how do we do design construction? Let's look at the materials. We just started doing whole life cycle analysis around embodied carbon, precast concrete versus steel versus concrete on site. We did the analysis over 3 locations, and what are the opportunities there to start reducing the carbon footprint? Water, waste, all areas we need to make more progress on, and it's looking at, how do you kind of continue to expand your scope, but not so wide that you can't make progress? And how do you kind of continue to push from just a simple, you may even not be tracking it, like the basic is the tracking and the metrics, and then moving into a strategy and eventually more of a leadership position there.
No, that's really interesting. I think that's a great point, that as you move along the spectrum, you're not permanently there. There are all new issues, whether it's questions of racial justice and equality or employee health and safety. They may not have been on people's radar screens, perhaps, some companies as much before, but now companies are sort of moving along that area. They've always had a compliance aspect, let's say, to racial equality. There's also some obligation, but how do you actually build those sort of factors into an area where you actually are, providing leadership? So hopefully it's not a completely Sisyphean struggle, and people actually do get those rocks up the hill. They're not always rolling back down on you, but there are always new rocks to be pushing up the hill, which is, I think, your point, and I think a great one. So let me turn now. So this is helpful because, partly your level of collaboration and integration in this area will will be shaped by where you are on this spectrum. The farther along you are, maybe the more deeply integrated and coordinated your finance and sustainability functions need to be. So let me put up a poll question. as we turn to the topic of collaboration. So here's a question for all of you who are watching, if you could just fill this out. How effective do you think the collaboration is right now between your sustainability and finance teams? Very effective, moderately effective, not very effective, I guess not sure, or don't want to admit. This is a really helpful level set for our panel. And I would note a couple other questions have come in. We're definitely going to be able to work them into the discussion. Okay. So looks like it's settling in like an annual shareholders meeting. I'll declare the polls closed, and we'll get the no write-in ballots. We'll get the results right now. So yeah, this is interesting. This shows that there's a real appetite out there among our audience today to move farther along. You got about equal, if not very effective, close to 40%, and about 40% saying only moderately effective. So let me start with sort of a general question, building on this for the panelists. Michael, could you talk a little bit about how you would describe your level of collaboration, and just generally, what are the keys to successful collaboration between finance and sustainability? And then as we go along in this webcast, we'll drill down in some specific areas of it.
Sure, Paul. I can take a crack at that. It sort of parallels my own personal journey in the space. I come from a liberal arts background. I studied Japanese history and psychology at Berkeley. When I was an undergrad, I did public policy. So I'm kind of the social science side. And I came at sustainability through human rights work that I was doing, and then labor standards, and then later the environmental work. And, my experience at Levi's was I was reporting into the chief supply chain officer, and I was always afraid of the supply chain finance VP. I was afraid of him, I mean, he's a tough finance guy, like all of you on the phone, or many of you on the call, tough finance guy, all about the numbers, and he's like, Michael, what are we doing here? Why are we spending money on this? And from those early days, I was kind of afraid of the finance people, because y'all live in the numbers world, and I lived in this other social sciencey world, and but over time, he became a great partner to me. I mean, he first started by helping us with the budget and the justification of the budget, and he taught me how to quantify that in terms of, risk management and then cost. And then later on, as we got more on the product side, into innovation and things like that. So he was helpful there. And then over the years, we just developed, like everything, right? It's personal relationships in the end. We got to know each other. I found out the guy actually was a lot worse. His bark was worse than his bite. He actually was a real softie, and he supported sustainability, and he believed in the things that we were trying to do, after all of that. And we became really good partners on the work, and I learned from him just how to think about sustainability in more financial terms and how to create incentives. We were doing a lot of work with our suppliers. And there's not a whole lot of incentives for suppliers to do labor compliance. It's all penalties. And so he and I worked with the International Finance Corporation, part of the World Bank, which has a supplier trade finance program that basically gets short-term trade financing to the suppliers. And we indexed the interest rate on that financing to the supplier performance on sustainability. So if the suppliers did better, then they had a lower interest rate. Lo and behold, the suppliers loved it. They were actually getting financial rewards for what they were doing on sustainability, and it saved the company a whole lot of cash from advancing money, help with our payment terms. In the end, we were saving about $300 million a year for the company, just in terms of cash flow in advances to the suppliers. And from that, we kind of built other programs. And in the end of the story is I got so interested in finance and sustainable finance, I took a 1-week course at Oxford on sustainable finance, taught by this professor there named Ben Caldecott, who's very active. Some of you may have heard of him, very active in these issues. And Walter, the supply chain finance VP, wrote my recommendation to the course. So now I know enough finance to be really dangerous, but it's really been a great journey for me. So my advice to our sustainability friends on the phone: don't be afraid of finance people. Underneath that tough skin,
yeah,
they
don't
may
spread
be
that
very,
too
very
widely,
supportive.
Michael. We work really hard on having a scary image.
Okay,
Oh
your secret
Kill
stays
us.
with
No,
me.
don't let that out. Okay, this is like a Vegas
This is
thing.
our
What
secret.
stays
Right.
happens on this website stays on this website. We're not gonna like undercut finance around the globe on this one. But what I also heard you say, in addition to that, Michael, is that it's really great when you work on a project together. So partly it's overcoming your presumptions about the other side, but it's working on that project together that actually delivers a real return to the company, forges that bond, and sort of moves collaboration along. Katrina, I don't know if you've got some thoughts on where you are in terms of your degree of collaboration at your firm and what makes it work.
Yeah, I've tried a few different things. So first is, I know the different finance leaders, so it was through discussions with all of them, figuring out who has a natural interest in this and are they the right person. So I have basically the controller, the assistant controller, and the head of accounting I view as my 3 key counterparts here. So like they signed up for the Accounting for Sustainability webinars and training sessions, and I'm sending them information all the time. So it's kind of a ongoing education process. And then there's specific groups that we want to work with. So for example, Treasury. Treasury had been talking about doing a green bond, but we didn't have the framework. So I think it's thinking really hard about if you're not even educating your finance team, but giving them the tools to be able to do and work with you. So we spent 3 months working on that green finance framework, and that was delivered from the sustainability side, trying to rope in all the operations team and the information to get that set up. We sponsored the funding to do the second party opinion and all that, so that when the capital markets opened, yesterday we did our first green bond issuance, $1.35 billion. We're absolutely thrilled to get that out there. And even better is it shows the program's not just a nice to have, which is why I'm doing it, but it shows there's actual capital markets benefits to that. Where we saved 6 to 8 bits, and on a $1 billion+ transaction, you're talking about $1 million a year in interest rate savings. So I think it's an ongoing relationship, but it's also thinking about how can you actually actively engage other than just say like, hey, I want you to be part of the sustainability team.
Right.
And then the last point is get the sponsor. We have Scott on the call. I can't tell you how impactful it is that my CFO is part of a group that Scott's in, A4S, and it makes a world of difference if you even just get the slight nod that your CFO is interested in sustainability. It just knocks down barriers to make progress on it.
Those are great pieces of very practical advice. Turn to Brad, and then I'll finish up with Scott on this. Brad, from your perspective, what do you think some of the keys are for effective collaboration here? We've heard some great ideas.
Yeah, I think we've done some research in this area for us has, and I think Michael and Katrina really referenced 2 of the 3 key things that we see. One being getting that buy-in from leadership is absolutely critical, and you need to have that to really achieve anything meaningful. Second, kind of what as Michael described in his experience, is finding a friend in the finance team that sustainability can work with, and figuring out that individual that maybe has a personal interest in the issue or is just kind of willing to consider new things. So maybe that's with Treasury and thinking about green finance options. Maybe it's the chief accounting officer and thinking about multi-capital accounting. Maybe it's someone within the corporate finance team that wants to kind of think about new ways to evaluate capital investments. But finding that key friend to work with you and that'd be willing to kind of help educate sustainability is a key piece. And then finally, finding ways where there's actually ways to integrate sustainability metrics within overall performance management and executive compensation of the organization. And being able to maybe leverage core key goals that the company has put forward, thinking through how those things would actually get measured and then translated into performance management. The ownership of that data when it comes from finance is a lot more credible usually than it is when it comes outside of the financial accounting system. So when you're starting to think through that, it impacts on compensation and performance management. Looking at that data management and the measurement process is key to moving that forward.
Okay, great. That's really helpful, broad perspective. And Scott, based on your experience as the big scary finance guy, what do you think are the sort of keys to overall effective collaboration that you've seen?
You know, for us, it's so embedded in so many different parts of the company. So everything, we have an Autodesk Foundation, which is a nonprofit that we allocate 1% of operating profit to as a business, and it runs as a nonprofit. And it's got two key missions, and one of them is sustainability. And so we make grants through that. We do a lot of pro bono work. They obviously, our grantees get free access to our software, and our employee base has great expertise, obviously, in our software, but also is super interested in how can they contribute beyond just, let me show you how to use the software. Right? They want to put their expertise to use to make an impact, too. We've built capabilities inside many of our products that are sustainability focused. I talked earlier about, for example, the embedded carbon calculator that we have for building construction, and understanding the ongoing impact that you can have through the design phase. So we have product investment. Our real estate team, obviously, that's generates a fair amount of carbon. The offices that we have, and so they're, as I mentioned earlier, we're at net zero this year. The real estate team is very embedded in the process. And if I just look across my team, that's what I was just taking notes. Yeah. Treasury is very engaged. Our controller is also engaged because of some of the disclosure. Audit, of course. Investor relations, much like Katrina's role, it's one that I think is a significant opportunity, and it's evolving, I'd say. The investor community are evolving to pay more and more attention to ESG initiatives. And even in our case, FP&A, because we have an internal tax on carbon, and I can talk about why we have that, but one of the things it does is generates a pool of funds that allows us to buy sustainable offsets to get to that net zero goal. So I don't feel like there's collaboration between two different groups. I feel like it's more embedded in kind of everything we do.
Yeah, and I think what you've also highlighted is that the collaboration isn't just at the CFO head of sustainability level. And we've all noted that it's a number of people, and frankly, sustainability affects numerous finance functions, whether it's on the capital markets side, in terms of IR or your treasury department, it's financial planning and analysis, it's a whole section.
Controller for disclosures, there's across the board.
So it needs to affect all of the functions within finance. And when it comes to your foundation, you're involved with that, right?
Yeah, I'm on the board.
Yeah,
right.
That's another way, just another practical way of building those links, right? Is if you're running a corporate citizenship or CSR or sustainability or a philanthropy effort at a company, make sure finance understands what you're trying to accomplish there. And ways in.
It's also part of this multiplier effect that I talked about earlier, right? We're a somewhat small company in terms of employee base, but the impact we can have is gigantic, and the foundation is just another way to multiply the impact that we can have.
Yeah, well, that's great. So Scott, you're still on the hook for this one. Sorry. Next question.
I'm not scaring you enough. Let me give you a scary look.
The big.
Scott, I want you as my CFO.
So, one of the things that I think has been alluded to is speaking a common language and coming to agreement on certain terms and what they mean. So, for example, how do you determine what does materiality mean? Because frankly, there are different perspectives. There's the investor relations, investor perspective, and raised by the SEC and so forth, but it's material to an investor making a decision about investing in your company. There's sometimes the broader aperture, it's overlapping, but somewhat broader aperture of, okay, what's important to our stakeholders, which may not always be exactly the same as what's important to your investors. There's a lot of alignment, but it's different. There's also another aperture, which is, okay, what's important to society at large? You know, where do we at Autodesk have a big impact on the world? That could be a different sort of kind of materiality analysis. So it's partly, how do you agree on materiality? How do you figure out what issues are material for your company? And how do you, it was mentioned before in metrics by Brad, how do you measure progress in these areas? So it seems like there's a lot of work to be done even on terminology and language, you know, and definitions here. So I'm wondering how you've approached that, and then maybe others will.
Yeah. You know, the broader issue of disclosure is one that we've spent a lot of time on, and through A4S and the TCFD, we've participated in that. We obviously SASB disclosures, and it's, I'd say the world of ESG and in particular sustainability disclosures is still somewhat immature. There's a number of different standards. When I speak to the users of that, which in some cases are employees, in other cases it's investors, the lack of the standard set of disclosure across companies is hurting the growth of real ESG investing. I think there's an enormous opportunity for, and when's the last time you heard a CFO say something like this, but more standardized disclosure across companies, because you need that, right? You need the ability to say, Autodesk, which is in the software business, I want to compare where they are on sustainability and on ESG as a stakeholder to a trucking company or to Equinix or to Starbucks. Right now there's not a standard basis for that, and I think that it not only hinders the investment community maturing in its approach, which I think there's a different level of maturity for ESG investing in Europe than there is in this country. It also, the goal of the disclosure is not just to favor investors. It's how you attract employees. It's how you drive change. Until you can have standardized disclosures and you can actually track against it, to your point, Paul, you can't tell if you're making progress. And if you can't tell if you're making progress, it's very difficult to bring change. And the goal that I would see on disclosure, besides I think the investment community is going to change dramatically as the wealth transfers from my generation to my kids' generation, right? So there's that side of it, which is attractive as a CFO, but the real goal of disclosure is to modify behavior and to change the amount of carbon we're all producing as members of kind of the broader society, whether you're a software company or a coffee company or a data server company. I think the modifying behavior is the key, and you can only do that if you can track it, and you can only track it effectively across the board if we have more standardized disclosures. So believe it or not, I'm a big fan of much more regulatory forced standardized disclosure in this space. I think it's something we have to get to.
Got it. And we've seen recent announcements by the Big Four about more standardization by at least 5 of the reporting frameworks out there that are calling for it. It's going to take a while. So I'm wondering, before we get to that stage, assuming we do, of increased standardization within Autodesk, how did you come to agreement on certain terms and metrics? Did finance drive it? Did sustainability do it? Who sort of helped?
Yeah.
Did legal drive it? Or who actually helped to make sure that you were speaking a common language and with a common set of goals?
You know, we had all three around the table that you just said, and I think there's a number of considerations as you start to go into what do I want to voluntarily disclose. It's, you know, in many of our largest customers, as they come to renew their agreements with us, they have a clause that's like, tell us where you are on sustainability. Show us your sustainability goals. Show us the progress you're making on that. So there's we get sales around the table as we think through what those disclosures are going to look like too, because we need to standardize that response to our customers as well. It was a collaborative effort. I will tell you, it's one that We continue to modify, continue to try to sharpen each year, because I think, again, I think we're in a strong position to have a big impact, and I want to be able to put that impact on display.
Got it. Katrina, let me ask you, because Scott mentioned disclosure as sort of a driving force on a lot of this. Curious, especially given your role in investor relations, how do you integrate sustainability into your external communications and maybe even to your internal communications? How is it built in? And how, and this goes to a question from the audience, how do you anticipate or address allegations of greenwashing? How do you make sure that what you're doing is authentic and not, kind of only the good news? So just curious as to how you go about on the internal and external disclosure side, bringing sustainability and finance together.
Yeah. I start with the greenwashing. Make sure you have a real program that's driving change before you start to communicate externally, right? Like don't get so far out there around stuff that you can't.
Did other people lose Katrina here?
Yes. Yeah, I did too. She seems to be frozen.
Yeah. So in terms of communication, I mean, that is one reason why we ended up merging the investor relations and sustainability functions was I'm using.
You know what I think we'll do is Katrina. Yeah. Okay. So sorry about that, everyone, because we do want to hear the answer to that, and we'll get to it when Katrina rejoins us. Let me talk a little bit about cultural change, and maybe Brad, you can walk us through that, because part of this is bringing these two different families together, and to what extent do you have to build a common culture? To what extent do they maintain their own cultures? How do you build this collaboration, culture of at least collaboration in the area between sustainability and finance?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. And it's a hugely important topic and a real challenge, to be frank. It's actually, finance culture is one of the practical guides that A4S worked on putting together, one of our initial set of guidance documents for CFOs and finance teams to think about what sustainability means within their role. And so we've talked a little bit about the necessity of having leadership, clearly talking about and articulating the need for more finance engagement within sustainability space. But I think once you step kind of beyond that and get that initial step of maybe leader-driven ambition, you then have to think about, well, what does this mean for ways of working, ways of internally within the finance team operating? How do you bring it into existing processes? And that's where it gets to a much deeper level of challenge. And from our experience, one of the ways to overcome and address some of those challenges is to really go through some education and awareness building of the right people with practical guidance, case studies, tools, and techniques that have been successful for others, so that those in the finance team can start to identify, one, the connection to their existing role that they have, and then two, application within their organization to do something that will enable better decision making. And as Scott talked about earlier, about how do you actually modify behavior, really a lot of the focus that we work on is around doing that modification to improve decision making that benefits both the business and the larger society as well. So this topic of finance culture, one of the reasons we introduced this past year something called the A4S Academy. It's a year-long learning and development program for senior finance executives to start to identify and understand kind of the tools and techniques available for the finance team to integrate sustainability within their function. And then we'll be sharing additional examples of how that's done through case studies, all available for free on the accountingforsustainability.org website.
That's great to know. Let me ask you, Brad, and Katrina, welcome back. We'll get back to your question in just a moment. Question, so how important do people think compensation is in driving collaboration between sustainability and finance? People are all over the lot on this, and I'm just wondering, whether it's necessary to have sort of share, have your pay depend on sort of the results of the collaboration, or whether it's fine to have different, relatively different compensation incentives. Brad or anyone else has a thought on that. Scott, I saw you. I think Katrina, Michael, anyone who wants to weigh in on the compensation aspect.
Yeah, go. No, you go, Brad. I'll follow you. I have an opinion on everything, so of course I have an opinion on this.
Yeah, I think it's key, and I think if the end goal, which I think for many of us probably is, to have an integrated strategy that incorporates sustainability as part of the overall corporate strategy, then it has to be a key part of the compensation incentive package. So I think at the end of the day, incentives through compensation schemes will probably drive behavior faster than any other mechanism that you may have at your disposal. So until you're able to really get that there at the right level, I think it becomes a challenge. But interested, Scott, to hear what you think.
I don't disagree. I think the integrated point you made is spot on. I think. Oops, I'm getting an echo. I think the what's equally important on that, though, is the rigor that goes behind the measurement. As you build it into compensation, there's a lot more rigor, there's a lot more tracking, there's a lot more focus, and I'm not sure the actual dollars and cents end up making a big difference in terms of the behavioral aspects of the executive team. Yeah, it's not a hobby, but I'm not sure that's what drives behavior. I think it's more the rigor that you end up putting around it when it's a compensation metric.
Yeah, I would just, making sure, I think fundamentally of compensation tied to anything, inherently it's gonna light a fire under people, right? But it's also making sure your program is advanced enough and sophisticated enough that you're measuring stuff correctly and can show progress against it before you do that. So, to do that, you would put a huge spotlight on sustainability, which would be fantastic, but making sure you can actually track against what you're trying to drive the executive teams to.
Right.
I would absolutely agree with these sorry, Paul. I would absolutely agree with these comments. And Paul, to come back to your broader question about culture, one of the things that Starbucks, I've been really impressed with it coming to Starbucks, is it's a real culture of leadership and innovation, not only in the sustainability space, but it's carried over to the finance space. And, Scott, I think you're familiar with this too, right? And this is kind of a message for my sustainability colleagues on the call here, right? We've always tended to think, oh, the money only comes from your basic, annual operating budget and capital budget, right? And, oh, we struggle to get that, and we're always getting cut, okay? But actually, and here's the secret, don't tell anybody outside the call, right? There's all these other pots of money that we can unlock. And culturally, if the finance team is open to this and wanting to be innovative with it, it's a real unlock, right? So the other pots of money, and y'all finance folks step in and correct me, right? The other one that Starbucks, really kind of pioneered was obviously the sustainability bonds. And the company has now issued over $2 billion of sustainability bonds that are really financing a lot of what we're doing in the supply chain with coffee and so forth. The second pot of money is this thing called balance sheet cash that the company, through the Treasury Department, is deploying towards different sustainability investments. I mean, the company invested $100 million in something called Valor Siren Ventures, which is this startup fund that actually funds different entrepreneurs to do innovative things, including sustainability innovation. So this balance sheet cash is a really interesting, concept, right? And if your Treasury Department is open to being innovative with that, there's a lot of things to be done with that, because increasingly it's starting to get a return, a better return than just keeping the money in the bank. And then the last piece, again, I mentioned it, but it's external financing. So entities like the World Bank are willing to invest in suppliers to do things like renewable energy. They'll match a company investment. There's impact investors that are increasingly willing to do this. So, boy, being able to tap into a culture of innovation on the finance team, but also starting to speak the language, it unlocks for us as sustainability leaders a lot more resources that can help expand the impact, but also accelerate what we're trying to do.
That's really helpful. Okay, good. Scott, you got the finance seal of approval from Scott there, Michael. So that's good. But again, these are secrets we're not letting out of the room. Very helpful. They're very helpful areas of collaboration and of innovation, and some good advice there. So Katrina, back to you on. We did hear what you had to say about avoiding greenwashing and make sure that you've got a good and authentic story, right? You've got a good program to go out with. But I am curious, and it's a big issue for companies when it comes to disclosure internally and externally. How you combine or appropriately have sustainability and finance work together when it comes to non-financial disclosures. Who takes the lead? How do you make sure there's enough rigor behind it? How do you go about handling the external and internal communication side?
Yeah, and I would say, do not underestimate the value of communications and putting your goals out there on the sustainability side. And in fact, you always had this conversation on compensation. I would say communication and goals being set at the leadership level and broadcast out to the market has an even bigger driving effect, because you're basically telling the world that your executive team is managing towards these goals, and then you create this whirlwind of people asking them about it. So you have, when we did this, basically I put the sustainability program on the earnings call, and then the Wall Street Journal called and said, great, let's interview your CEO. And then the CEO said, what's the program? Go brief me on it, and what are we doing here? So again, it drives a lot of internal input, and executives want to look good, right? Like if you have commitments out there, they're going to be tracked against it. Then they're going to put funding behind making sure that you are marching against it. For me, it's improving your, how do you get your message out there? Use your investor relations team. Use your comms team. We have weekly meetings with our communication teams, and we coordinate press releases. Get someone or yourself to promote you to get into all those internal leadership meetings. So I basically was stalking the head of sales to make sure we got into our Salesforce sales event that we had, with over 1,000 sales teams, and I pestered him for about 3 months to give us a spot. And create material that who's creating these decks, so send it to the chief of staff. Hey, I put together this slide. Maybe you can slip it into the deck at the next leadership offsite. So continually not just tell them to put it in, but create kind of sound bites and stories and think about where they can weave it in. Eventually, some of that will stick and get out there. So I'm constantly kind of looking for spots to promote the program.
That's great. I love, and so what I've heard thus far as we're working our way through this, so leadership matters, connections matter, those personal connections between individuals, culture matters, communications matter, and which you just talked about, Katrina, and obviously compensation matters, not just in what you pay, but the process you go through that. And of course, money matters. And Michael was talking a little bit about where the money comes for all of this, both in terms of where it comes to fund it, and then obviously on the return of investment. But I'm wondering, Scott, Katrina, maybe others, but how do you build sustainability into the budgeting, into the strategic planning, and really into the budgeting process? Because that's such a core part of what happens at a company. What do you do when if it's not on the radar screen for your board or for your finance department or for your CEO during the budgeting process, you'd be scrambling to get some money out of the cash on the balance sheet. So how does it get built in, Scott?
Yeah, I can go, but Katrina, do you want to weigh in on that first?
Sure. So from a budgeting perspective, it was so interesting, and I actually really changed my view around this, because originally 2 years ago I'm like, oh, part-time heads are fine, we're all doing the best we can, and then the team was really pushing back saying like, no, let's look at dedicated resources and actually carving people out where we have a team working on this. So we submitted our ask functionally, but then we also we have a strategic initiative budgeting review that's separate. And so we also pitched the entire program. So it's not just the program stuff, but like what is operations doing, what is marketing doing, what is procurement doing, and we put a consolidated ask up to the executive team. So what ended up happening was I got some approvals directly, but some turned down, and then we got full approval under that strategic initiative that we could then reallocate budget. So it's about not just helping my small team, but knowing, you know, what does renewables team need, what does the social team need, what does we need to do in governance, and then helping push for that budget. And my CFO was part of that, right? He reviewed with me. He scratched some of my crazy ideas off and kept most of them on there, and that's what we ended up getting approved. And it was a massive, massive help.
Got it. And yeah, Scott, how do you, this partly funding of positions and so forth and initiatives, there's also, you know, how do you gauge the cost of capital? How do you build it into, you know, the capital allocation process?
I think we all have to modify the way we think about it from this is money being spent to, you know, to feel good and to be able to put a nice paragraph in the 10K to this is critical to, and not just because of the greater good. It helps you attract. I mean, you look at the graduates that are, I almost say kids, the graduates that are coming out of school today. They want to work for a company that they're proud to say, I work for company X, right? And a part of what makes them proud is that you're doing the right things, that you're working for good, that you're not just driving for a profit, which is, by the way, super important. Without profits, we wouldn't be here. But it's more than that, right? And so I think the investments that we make through the foundation, through our internal tax on carbon that allow us to be net zero, not only pays dividends in terms of the straight business benefits on product sales, and you know, we have a part of our sales compensation plan that's a little bit of a contest that rewards our sales team for making sales that will drive sustainability. But it also pays dividends in terms of the overall brand and the reputation of the company and the attractiveness of top talent that want to come work for you at the end of the day. So it's a little bit hard to put it all that into a spreadsheet and say the return is, you know, 12.6% and that's just above or just below our investment line. But I think we all have to start thinking of this as something that is not a nice to have, but a have to have across the board. And then the question just becomes, how do you size it?
Got it. All right, we're down to like about a minute or so left. Let me go quickly around, maybe starting with Katrina, then Michael and Brad and Scott. Your one main piece of advice for companies that both of our companies on the webcast today who are looking to get finance and sustainability to work more effectively together, what's the number one thing you'd recommend for them, Katrina?
Yeah, find your allies and match it up with whether they're passionate about sustainability, and then bring them in. So it's not just your small group. There's 30 to 40 people that you're working with, and continue to have those broader relationships drive across, because you amplify your effect so dramatically with that.
Michael, your...
For sustainability folks on the line, don't be afraid of finance.
Killing me,
finance
man.
Is your friend.
We have a
And sorry, Scott. And for the finance people on the phone, my message is, guess what? Sustainability can help make money.
Brad and then Scott.
Yep, using that message of finding allies, I think you actually even have to be even more directive than that, is to make sure to set out space where you have the opportunity to have a coffee between a sustainability and a finance person. All the more difficult in today's environment, but actually carve out ways where the two groups will connect.
Great. And Scott.
I think if you're on this call, you have a passion for the topic. And if you've got a passion for the topic, what I'd say is, on the other side of the bizarre year we've had in 2020 and the pandemic and the way economies shut down and are reopening, there's a reset coming. You hear people talking about the Great Reset. This is a real opportunity to not think incrementally, but to think on a complete quantum step function change. And I encourage everyone to look at their own business, to look at their own company, look at their own department, and say, what can I do differently as we come back out of this and things begin to return to normal?
Great piece of advice. Yeah, build sustainability into your reopening, your physical reopening, and into your overall reset. I think that's a wonderful note to end on. Thank you all very much for some really great advice. Tell all of your friends still to be afraid of finance, but you don't have to be. Feel free to download the resources that you'll see on the screen and some others that have shown up in the chat box. Please complete the evaluation form if you would to let us know what you thought of this, and so we can always get better if you would. And I just want to thank you all for joining us today, and I want to thank the panelists. You were just wonderful. It was a real pleasure to spend time with you. Thanks for doing so. Stay safe and be well.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks, everybody.